Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight for Conversations with Tim. We do this every Tuesday night, 7 o'clock, and it's just exactly what it sounds like. It's conversations with me, with various friends of mine. Could be all kinds of topics. Just depends on what we have going on. Tonight, my guest is a friend of mine named Grayson Armour, and so Adam, you want to go ahead and bring him in? And so what basically their format is that Grace and I's gonna have a conversation, and you get to eavesdrop on the conversation, and that's the whole format. So if you have some questions, you can throw them in the comment section, and maybe Adam will get those to me, and maybe we'll have time for them, maybe we won't. Just depends how we go tonight. But Grace and I's gonna have a conversation, and just see how that conversation goes, and the conversation in a general sense, I want to introduce him and kind of catch up with who he is a little bit. We're going to talk about racism. I've had two previous topics about racism. I think maybe 3 weeks ago, I had two of my pastor friends from South Side Chicago area. And then maybe 2 weeks ago, I think maybe one of my friends from Tennessee, raised in Kansas City, a guy I played football with in college that was on with me, and we talked about racism, and so this is going to be a different topic. This is a kid raised in Carlinville, completely different background. Wasn't raised in the inner city, wasn't raised in Southside Chicago. Raised in a different kind of family background than my other friends were, and so we're gonna have a conversation because I think it's just a needed topic that we need to kind of get our heads around and hearts around as we kind of move forward in the culture we're in. So Grayson, thanks for being with me tonight. And Grayson's kind of on the hot seat. He don't really know what the heck is going to happen to him. So,
well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be on here.
So let's kind of introduce you. So obviously some people maybe know you. You was born and raised in Carlinville, Carlinville native.
Yep.
Been here your whole life. Your family owns a dairy, and it's like a multi-generational family passed down through the generations. Family dairy. Why don't you kind of tell us who your family is a little bit?
Yeah, right. So I grew up here in Carlinville. I all the way through my life lived in the same house that my dad grew up in, I'm in the house that my dad grew up in, and also that his dad grew up in. So the dairy farm has been in my family for at least 3 generations. My dad's currently running it. I don't have any plans of taking it over, but I've worked there all the way through high school. Yeah, that's like my family background. My mom's a vet, and then my dad's a dairy farmer.
Did you see the Cross Church Cares video or Cross Kids Cares video that he did out there?
Yeah, I did. That thing was great. I had no idea it existed until he showed me. He was watching it, and I heard his voice on there, and then I heard BJ Vineyard's voice, and I was like, wait a second, because he was my cross country coach in middle school.
Right.
And so I heard BJ's voice, and I heard my dad's voice, and I was like, wait a second, what is this? Walked in, and he was watching his video. I think that was super fun.
Yeah. Well, the girl that was on there, Miss Kathy, that's my wife.
Right.
So
yeah.
She's the crazy one. No telling what she might get on there and do. So anyway, so raised in Carlinville, and now you are a student in Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us what's your major in Stanford.
So I'm majoring in a major that I designed myself, where I took aerospace engineering and computer science and kind of smashed them together. Took the core from both and put them together because there's oftentimes I've seen a gap between pure aerospace engineers and pure computer programmers, and I kind of wanted to fill that gap. And also it filled my interest very well. So I made my own major, and that's what I'm doing.
Okay. Now, obviously, we live in Carlinville, little bitty town, whatever. But I'm Carlinville's got a lot of things that have happened in Carlinville that we should be proud of. There's a lot of, cool things that have happened, where there's some businesses that have taken place, like a Prairie Farms,
Yeah.
First to finish. I mean, we got things like that Carmack, there's things like that have taken place for heaven's sakes. Cross Church. I mean, there's not very many churches this size in a small town. Kelsey Card, an Olympian, we got some really cool things and that list can go on and on and on, and it can go on for, decades of things that have taken place. Most people will not know what you just said. Now, are you just now finishing your sophomore year or your freshman year?
Just finished my sophomore year.
Okay. So what happened is that 2 years ago, Grayson graduated Carlinville High School. He was blessed enough to be able to go to Stanford, which is a very competitive school to get into, let alone to be offered the scholarships and all the things to be able to get into that kind of school. He gets into Stanford. He goes in, and they have majors, so you get to choose majors that you want to have. So Grayson could choose, of all the different majors, and he named two of them. I saw this major, and I saw this major. And Grayson, the freshman, says, you know what? I don't really want to do either one of these two things. I kind of want something in between, a hybrid between these two things. And so Grayson, the end of a first semester, going into the second semester, freshman, goes to whoever he goes to, advisors or whatever, and says, I'd like to do this process. And Stanford has a process. And so what Grayson does, now get your head around this. What Grayson does is he goes through their process to create his own major at Stanford University. Now, I think that's mind-blowing, man. I think that is absolutely mind-blowing.
I appreciate that.
I don't mean that. I mean, obviously, when it's one of those kind of deals when you're doing something, you don't think it's that big of a deal because it's like, well, I don't know, I'm just doing it, right? But it's kind of cool, right? So it's kind of cool. So tell me again, what's the two majors you took together and blended them, and what are you calling it?
Aerospace engineering and computer science. So rocket science and then computer programming.
Yes.
And I put them together and just called it aerospace computer science. Not really original, but I didn't want people seeing my resume and being confused what I was studying. So I figured I'd just put the names together. Makes sense. So
all right. And then you create you get your advisors and the various processes you have to go through to get all that approved. And you work out your core studies for that. And then at the end of this process, when you graduate from Stanford, what's your plan?
So I plan on commissioning into the Navy through officer candidate school because I realized I've had internships the last 2 summers, and I have kind of realized that a desk job isn't really what I'm looking for. And plus, I was really an inch away from taking the NROTC scholarship exiting high school anyway. And it's always been something that I wanted to do, is to serve as an officer in the armed forces in some capacity. And then I realized that, my wish is to do something aerospace related and then also serve were not mutually exclusive, that I could do both of them. And so my goal is to commission to the Navy as an aviator, meaning a pilot. But I'm currently working out kinks with my eyes right now. I have to get laser eye surgery if I wish to be eligible to do that. And so that's a work in progress. Yeah. But otherwise, if my eyes end up not being good enough, I can still join as a flight officer, meaning the backseater in a jet aircraft, or the leader of the air crewmen in the aircraft. But either way, I'm pretty sure that's what I want to do. It's just been something that I've always been pulled to my entire life, and I've always been the type to say no excuses and no thinking about. I don't want to have regrets of what if in my life. As much as I can minimize that would be great. And so I don't want to have to look back and be like, what if I joined the Navy? I wanted to do that. What if I had? Instead, I want to do it, and it's something I can do, and I think it's something great that I should do. So that's my plan after college.
And are you comfortable telling them what your real dream is, in the perfect world?
Yeah. So the dream job, this reach job, is to be an astronaut. That would be the best thing ever. But obviously the chances of being selected as an astronaut are pretty bad. But joining the military is a good step towards that. But I want to do the military anyway, and so it's convenient that I could apply to be an astronaut as I'm in the military. You can be active duty and still apply, and that is totally doable. But then I'd also be perfectly happy if I wasn't selected. So that's
a long ways from a dairy farm.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
A long ways from a dairy farm. Well, I think that's awesome. And, again, I'd rather for you to shoot for being an astronaut and miss than, make all the excuses why you can't do it and, settle for something else. So I'm proud of you, man. I think anybody in Carlinville who hears your story have to be proud of you and have to be rooting for you. And, I think that's pretty cool, and just the fact that you're in Stanford, forget the rest of it. You're in Stanford,
Stanford.
Whatever. Most of us wouldn't have gotten to Stanford. All right. So, that's just what it is. So
thank you.
Anyway, so that wasn't why we got together to talk today, but I just want to brag on you a little bit. Cause I think there's a lot of things that so many times in a small town, we don't talk about, small town stuff enough. And, sometimes it's like things happen outside of our small town. That's, oh, that's so big and that's so cool. And but there's a lot of big stuff that happened that came out of a small town, and people that graduated from our high school or that came out of our county that went on and did other things that are pretty amazing. And so I think that's just pretty cool. And so we'll be watching you. And, if you ever make it to space, you can wave at us from up there. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Sounds
So
good. Sounds good.
kind of, we're going to be talking about racism. And so a lot of people would look at you and they're like, what in the world is Tim and this dude talking about racism about? That's kind of a dumb topic for those guys, So, but why don't you just kind of back up a little bit, and why don't you kind of tell us about some of your experiences kind of grew up in Carlinville?
So, first of all, I loved growing up in Carlinville. It was such a great experience growing up in a small town. Like, you have opportunities that you wouldn't have in other cities, or in the city, for example, playing sports that I wouldn't have been able to play if I had gone to a bigger school, or like participating in as many things that I got to do. I really got to branch out and explore what I wanted to do, like the musical or scholastic bowl or band or anything like that. Where in a lot of bigger schools, you kind of have to focus on one area, and that kind of funnels you into a certain area. But growing up in a small town and a farming community gave me so much more perspective than I think I could have gotten other places. Working with my hands out in the dairy farm, worked most summers through middle school and high school I spent working out in the farm. And that just taught me a lot about, the value of hard work and working with your hands is a valuable skill. And I think it prepared me really well going into Stanford. Is that a lot of people thought that maybe it would be something that would make me underprepared. But I feel like going into Stanford with coming from a rural community where only, in fact, like 3% of Stanford people come from rural zip codes, I think it's really given me an edge in a way that coming from a small town has taught me so much more than people could learn from living in the city. And so it's been really great. But it also has had one of the shortcomings is that our county, Macoupin County, is, according to the last census, 97.6% white. And growing up as an Asian American in this community was sometimes tough in the way that I did feel discriminated against a lot, whether it was in school or outside of school. It really didn't matter what was going on or where I was. It's always something that I have to worry about when I'm back home, which is pretty annoying and like also just demeaning. Is that like, when I'm walking down the street, sometimes I have people yell things at me, or like when I walk into a room and I'm the only person of color in the room, and I just have to worry about that kind of stuff. And one thing was that going over to Stanford, where it's very diverse and people, I suddenly didn't have to worry about it as much. And it made me think about it a lot more than I had when I was still at home, because when I was in high school and people would say things, I would just think, oh, that's the way it is. And I would just kind of deal with it. And then when I went to school, suddenly I didn't have to hear things about it anymore. Hear about my eyes or my skin or something like that or anything. And it just got me thinking that this is indeed a problem of this community. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that it's a problem because a lot of times the things that were said to me, I know were not meant to be hateful. They weren't like trying to make me feel bad a lot. A lot of people thought that it was funny to say those things, that it was okay, and it was just a joke. I don't know how many times I got told something and I'd complain about it, and they'd say, "Oh, I'm just kidding. Like, why are you so angry? I'm just kidding." And so that was just a facet of growing up here that was a little unfortunate. But ultimately, I want to keep it that I loved growing up here. It was great. But that's just one thing that was always on my mind and has been on my mind.
Yeah, I think if you kind of if someone gave me a picture of you and said, "This is Grayson. Grayson's a high achiever academically. He was athletic. He was in school musicals and band. He did these kind of things. These were his parents. Just kind of described your life in general, and then said, true or false, Grayson experienced racism, or Grayson experienced prejudice, or Grayson experienced a word of that nature," I think I would probably choose false. I think. You know what I'm saying? I think most of us would. I mean,
right. Yeah.
I don't think that's how we process that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we look at that. And so that's part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation is not to go back and have an individual conversation about a specific event or who said what or who did what, but just to have a conversation with someone from your perspective. You know, you're not Southside Chicago guys that I'm friends with or whoever. You're Carlinville, and here's my story. And so, so let's talk about some terms that that, you know, and we're not gonna get all that, you know, that deep, maybe all the terms, but just kind of terms that we use that are divisive. Some of the terms are divisive because of politics. Some of them are divisive because of generational, you know, gap understanding. Some of them are divisive because of the way they've been misunderstood or manipulated. What are some terms that you think are that if you're going to try to help a guy like me or the people who may be listening to us understand, what are some terms you think are important that we understand from your perspective that maybe we don't understand the way you understand them?
Right. So here's, I guess, the first term that just comes to my mind would be privilege, and specifically white privilege. I know a lot of people feel like that is a divisive term because it singles out white, and that's like a thing that like singles out. But the fact of the matter is that the privilege is something that comes from all sorts of things. There's not just, white privilege is not the only form of privilege. There's privilege, socioeconomic privilege. Like if you grew up in a well-to-do family, like I'm privileged in that my family, we have a home, we own property. All farmers in this area are privileged in that the way they own property that a lot of people just don't own, right? And white privilege is simply just the privilege you have of being a white person, is that you don't have to worry about the things that people of color in the United States have to worry about in regards to just the color of their skin. Like most people here didn't have to ever worry about being the only person of color walking into a room, or, you know, being told that they shouldn't be the lead in the senior musical because the lead shouldn't be Asian. Like those are just things that most people around here would just never have to deal with, and probably just don't even think about because it's not a thing in their lives. But it's something that I have to think about, and it's something that Black people have to think about, and any people of color in the United States have to think about that kind of thing, just by virtue of their skin color. And so what white privilege means, it's not meant to single out white people. It's not meant to demonize white people. Like, you're not at fault for being white. Like, no one's guilty of anything. No one hates you because you're white. It's just that, quite simply, you do have a privilege of being white if you are white. It's just how it is right now. And it's not meant to be divisive, but I think it oftentimes this term divisive is misinterpreted. But it's not meant to divide anyone. It's just something that people should recognize, is that there is a benefit to not being a person of color in the United States, in that you don't have to deal with that kind of discrimination on your day-to-day, in your day-to-day.
Yeah.
So that's
all right. What's another term?
Yeah. Another term would be here, let me see. I have a small list. Let me see. Oh, racism, just racism overall, I guess. Something that I've seen in the community and with a lot of people I've had conversations with is racism is oftentimes looked at as a binary terms. And by that, I mean, you either are racist or you're not racist, and there's no in between. There's just, are you racist or you're not racist? When in reality, that racism comes out in a multitude of different ways. There's everything from overt racism, which would be like using the N-word or overtly supremacist things. And then there's more covert things, like what do you think when you see a person of color? Even though you don't consciously think it, like, what is your subconscious reaction to seeing them? You oftentimes read stories about Black people being in stores and feeling like they're being watched the entire time or being followed around. A lot of people would probably not consider that overt racism, but that is still a fact. The fact is that if they're Black, they have to worry about that. That is racism. And it's not necessarily means that it's menacing or like it's there's ill intention. It's just that everyone grows up with their own circumstances, right? And you grow up with your family, and you grow up in a certain community, and you grow up with friends and everything like that. And you go to church and whatever. But think about growing up in a predominantly white community like our own. A lot of people here don't really have friends that are non-white. That's just, and that's not your fault. That's just, growing up in an area where there aren't very many people of color here. Like, it's just a natural thing. But that also leads to have people to have tendencies towards seeing people of color as different. And that's what I experienced. I know that most people who said stuff to me weren't saying it with ill intention, but just didn't know any better. And that still is racism. And a lot of people would say, I'm not racist, but, and they'd say something clearly racist to me. And that was always like a fun juxtaposition to me. But yeah, racism is not just a binary classifier. It's something that there's a spectrum, and everyone has their own racist tendencies, myself included. No one is free of this. You know, being proactive against racism means constantly thinking about what your tendencies are, what your privileges are, and then like acting accordingly. It's not like you need to, you know, apologize or anything, but you should be conscious of your privileges if you're not a person of color. And also if you are a person of color, like what your own tendencies are. It's an individual thing with self-reflection and, you know, thinking about it.
Okay. Well, before we go to other terms, you have some other terms. Let's talk about, because one of the things we would talk about was how, you know, these, you know, it's the issue a lot of times is the divisiveness and how, you know, I use the illustration, you know, I was talking on the phone, and so you're from a town and I'm from a different town, and our schools are rivals. And so we can't be friends because we have to hate each other because we're rival schools. Mm-hmm. When really, if we'd grown up in the same neighborhoods, we'd have been buddies, you know, but we can't be buddies because we wear a different color, you know, letter jackets. And so, you know, it's you know, I remember growing up in school and there's just schools you hated. You know, it's like, because you didn't have a reason. Back then, we didn't have social media, so you didn't really get to know people outside of the sports you played them, and it was just different, you know. And so they're from that school, and you're from this school, and they're from that town, and you just didn't cross pollinate, and it just didn't happen, you know. And but you know, a lot of times we have these things. It's like, well, you're this, and you have this political view, and I have that political view, or you have, you know, this perspective on a topic and have this other perspective on a topic. Therefore, you know, we disagree, and so we're going to argue a topic. Mm-hmm. And the question I have with people a lot of times is the conversation when I'll ask them, do you want to be right, or do you really want to discover the truth? Because if a person is supposed to be right, there's no reason to have a conversation. We're just arguing. There's just you know, whatever. And if you wanted to figure out the truth, then we can walk down a path together to figure out what the truth is. Because at the end of the day, there is truth. Yeah. You know, and a lot of times truth, you know, sometimes truth's in the middle. Sometimes one person's all right and one person's all wrong. But we can always figure out what truth is later, if we want to know what truth is. But if we just want to be right, because you're clearly wrong. I mean, I'm right. You're wrong. Period. Well, there's no.
You're not getting anywhere, huh?
No, there's no way to win that. Okay.
Yeah.
And so one of my big issues in this time we live in is so, you know, the unkindness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Just the general, the level of jerk out there in the world today. You know, if you was to measure like the jerkometer, you know, whatever it is, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, you know, where maybe in the 50s it was like a 2, you know, the culture is like a 2, maybe. It's like a 9 right now, you know. It's like and it's shaking, like it's, you know, it's about to break up. It's like it's people just mean. They're just jerks, you know. I feel like take anything to attack somebody or to call them a name or, you know, whatever.
I feel like social media and the internet's definitely exacerbated that problem because you know, everyone's more courageous behind a screen, and you know, I often see when I scroll through Facebook or something like that, people are just like mean to each other. And it's like, would you say that to someone's face if they were right in front of you? Like, probably not. And I don't know. Yeah, that's definitely a not good thing. I would agree with you on that.
And especially it's hard to solve a problem that's a real problem if we can't talk about it.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's what I think.
Exactly.
So part of the issue is, you know, we're talking about, you know, things like, you know, privilege. And if we're going to make an issue of white privilege, okay, well, I'm stuck on the issue of white privilege, and you're trying to tell me, well, no, there is white privilege, and I'm stuck on the issue of white privilege. We're going to argue about it because I can't understand you. When really, if we can stop arguing about it and have some kindness between us and some general understanding. So let me just listen to you for a second. I mean, hear where you're coming from. Oh, that's what you mean. Okay, I
Yeah.
got you now. I'm tracking.
Sharing perspectives, sharing opinions,
You
talking,
know,
civil discourse. It's all good.
that's just being good human beings. Like,
Yeah,
come
I
on,
agree.
people, just be good human beings. You know, it's
I
not
agree.
that complicated. You know,
You know,
stop being jerks.
something that was super interesting to me that you probably find interesting was that growing up here, obviously a very conservative area, I always heard things about like the evil liberals and things like that, the evil left and everything like that. And then when I got into Stanford, which is in the Bay Area, which is arguably the most liberal area in the entire country, then of course I heard about that too. And I was all worried. I was like, oh man, am I going to be able to fit in? Like, are people just going to hate me just because I come from a Republican like family and in a rural area? Then I get there and I find that all these people, while they are definitely way more liberal than the people at home, they're totally great. Like they're great people, and like they're okay to talk about things just like people here are. And it's like but except they demonize the right as the right demonizes the left. And I going from here to there, I realized that they're not so different. Like the people here and the people there, they're not as different as they like to think. And if they just sat down and were okay with talking with each other, they'd realize that. But unfortunately, a lot of times people are not willing to talk about it. But yeah, that was just a unique thing that I had moving from a very conservative area to a very liberal area. I was just realizing that people are people, and people have good intentions and care about other human beings. But oftentimes just point fingers too much and don't think about like each other's perspectives. Like they don't know what it's like to grow up on a farm. And y'all don't know what it's like to be in the Bay Area, like living in college in the Bay Area. But just like, yeah, like you said, sitting down, talking about things, it's very productive. And I feel like I've had really eye-opening, great conversations with a lot of Stanford students that have not held the same political views as I do, or most people here. And it's been great and fruitful, and I hope they've learned things about my perspective, and I've definitely learned things about theirs that I hadn't known. So yeah, like you're saying, like sitting down like this and just having a conversation is one of the most productive things that I think people can do, especially nowadays when the finger pointing that goes on all the time.
We could solve a lot of problems if people just talk and listen.
Yeah, for sure.
Are there any other kind of terms you wanted to kind of surface and
on
your list?
Well, the last one, last term I'd probably like to talk about is what is systemic racism. A lot of people don't seem to understand what systemic racism is, or like what does it mean if racism is systemic. And simply what systemic racism means is racism built into the systems, into a system. That's quite literally the definition. And when it's spoken about with America, it's the point that a lot of things that we have and we take for granted in American society are inherently racist. And that statement, without any evidence or backing up, can be pretty divisive. Like if you just hear that, people be like, "Oh no, it's not." Like it's not that anymore. But you can see certain statistics that show that yes, certain systems in America are racially biased, and you can see it historically too, in the way that slavery was abolished back in 1865, I think, with the 13th Amendment. But there is a caveat in there saying, with exception to convicted criminals. And nowadays, if you say the mass incarceration in the carceral state, things like that, saying that Black people are targeted for prison more than other races, which is statistically true, just statistically. But then you can make arguments about like why it's like that. But if you look back historically and see that in the late 1800s, that Alabama had like 73% of their economy was using prison labor, and the prison population was 90% Black, and it was right after the Civil War, where these people had just held slaves, and then they made Black codes which criminalized Black people, and that led to them being in prisons and then working for free, basically. And the point of that whole thing is that there's continuity, there's historical continuity. These systems are inherited from systems that came before, right? A lot of American systems that we have, the justice system, legislative bodies, everything is based on how it's been. And quite simply, the facts are that how it's been has been racist. And so you can still see those leftover, those remnants of overt racism in systems that have been built for certain groups over certain other groups. And that's pretty much what systemic racism means, is that those systems were built in a time when people of color were not considered equal to white people. And then we inherited those systems. And so naturally, logically, those systems would still be favoring certain groups over others. And another example of that would be the education system. Something that I think is really interesting is, for example, Tim, if I asked you who discovered the North American continent, what would you say?
Christopher Columbus.
Christopher Columbus, right? Like, because that's what we're taught in school.
Right.
But we don't ever talk about how Christopher Columbus came and there were people already there. Like, Christopher Columbus didn't discover anything. Like, people were already there. Entire societies were there. Like the Coquille Mountains, the Mississippian culture, highly developed, was right there. I mean, the Mayans invented zero before Europeans did, and they invented hieroglyphic writing. And then Columbus comes here and he discovers it. And now that's how we teach it in the history books, is that Columbus discovered America. No, Columbus didn't discover anything. Columbus claimed it for Europeans when people were already there. And that's like a prime example of how you can see systemic racism in the education system, is that is a commonly taught fact, when really Columbus, like I said, did not discover anything. He just showed up. And actually, he got removed from power by the Spanish crown because he was too cruel to his colonists and to the natives, which they also conveniently leave that out of a lot of education. And you can apply that to a lot of different things through the Civil War period, all the way through Reconstruction, all the way up to modern day. It's just built into the system of how it's been.
Yeah, the system. I remember my friends from South Side of Chicago talking about the redlining stuff and how they would do. And I don't get, we're going to run out of our time, but not tell their story again. But just how they would take individual communities, they would target them and they'd redline them, and they'd tell the whole story. Well, developers and city planners did that intentionally. Right. And then when you hear those guys, I mean, I guess if you heard the city planners and the city developers tell the story, they probably have their version of the story. But when you hear my friends tell the story, their story is about how they destroyed these communities and how they impoverish these communities, and on and on and on it goes, And the system it's built. It has. They may not use the word racism in the sentence, but the system has. I'll use the word built-in oppression, which is what we're really talking about. That has built-in oppression into the system to keep wealthy people wealthy and poor people poor.
Yeah, and those red line districts, you can look at maps of the modern day cities, and you can redraw those red lines over the districts that they were redlined in, and you can see exactly where the ghettos still are. You can see where the impoverished areas of the cities, and why are they there. I mean, in the 40s, when they were doing this redlining, which is the federal government program, an explicit factor in determining which areas of the city got redlined was percentage of Negroes, is what they say. So percentage of Black Americans who are living there. They take that into account. The greater the number, the worse the real estate. And so it was very explicit in that sense. And then now we're seeing the leftovers. And people ask, why are these ghettos here? Well, you can trace it back historically again. Yeah. I mean, other things, the fact that I told you about in 1947, returners from World War II, the GI Bill in Mississippi, that I told you that fact. Here's the statistic for all of you guys, since I haven't said it. But in 1947, the GIs were returning from World War II. In Mississippi, 50% of the population was Black at that point in time, and 3,000 GIs got benefits from the GI Bill, got mortgages for homes, and only 2 of them were Black. And that disparity just doesn't make sense. And that, there are lots of Black Americans who served in World War II, but the GI Bill was denied to a lot of them after they returned. Same thing happened with the Vietnam War. And so a lot of homes that are now owned in cities were a result of the government post-World War II having a very friendly environment to homeowners wanting to buy homes. And that was just quite simply denied to Black Americans who had earned it. Another thing that's actually very relevant to here in a rural community like Illinois is why a lot of these farms you see are generational farms, like my family farm included. And then we ask, where did that come from? Well, they were inherited from, you know, your grandpa who inherited from his grandpa, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately, the land came to original ownership of these families in a time when Black people could never have bought that property. Like either they, well, it was time, it was still slavery was legal during that time, and then also even if they were free, they would be discriminated against in purchasing that land explicitly. And then now, fast forward 100 some years, then we can still see it that white families predominantly own the agricultural property in the United States, and it has been that way. Like it's been generationally handed down.
Wow. Yeah, they you know, I think on my blog, which is timrodas.com,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something that posted either an hour ago or not very long ago, probably today, I think tonight. It's a video by one of the guys who did the Veggie Tales. He was actually the voice of the Bob the Tomato, or the guy's name was.
Bob the Tomato, classic.
Yeah. And he's the guy. He was the guy that he didn't give the Mississippi stat you gave, but he's the guy who gave there was like 65,000 GI Bill guys that got. It was like I almost say 100. It's a really low number of African Americans who got the home loans.
Yeah,
when you see the stat, it's just overwhelming. It's like,
I think
wow.
the stats speak volumes, right? Like it's.
Yeah.
I mean, here's another stat I have pulled up on my phone that I had. Just 2% of the $120 billion in federal housing administration loans distributed between 1934 and 1962 were for non-white families. 98% of the federal loans for housing went to white people. And so like the hard part about these kind of problems is that there's no one person you can just point at and be like, it's their fault. It's just, it's how it's been in the country.
It's the system.
Right. And that's what the systemic racism, that's what that means. It's not like your fault individually or whoever's fault individually. It's just that that's how it's been. And we're still living with the inherited systems that were designed a certain way. And, you know, other stats like unemployment amongst Black people is double what it is for white people, even amongst college graduates. The wage gap between a Black person expected to make half as much as a white person with the same credentials, and the wage gap increases with the amount of education. So Black doctors and white doctors, the wage gap is even larger between the two. And you can, I'm not sure what exactly that source is, but you guys can look that up. I found it a while ago, so I can't exactly remember the source, but a lot of these statistics have been there, and they just don't get talked about very much. But I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's like apathy is a real thing, you know. I don't mean that even in the negative sense. It's easy to be apathetic when there's two. I'm gonna just say there's two kinds of apathy. There's the kind of apathy when I see it, I can make a difference, and I just don't care. Okay. And then there's a kind of apathy where it's like, I can't do anything about that. That is so overwhelming to me. Like, I can't make a difference. You know, what in the world? You know, I just need to ignore that because it breaks my heart. Okay. And one of the things that kills me is, I'm pastor of a church, and the church, in my opinion, has been silent for way too many years, generations, decades, whatever you want to call it, centuries. And obviously it's not, we don't have time, tearing that whole topic, but, there were people that call themselves Christians that justified slavery. There were people that would have been pastors that would have probably justified slavery. There have been people that, maybe know it was wrong, but, not political reasons in Republican, Democrat, but political reasons in I need to keep my job. There's a reality of that. It's like I can't speak out against this because I'll get something back against that. And we there's just a place. And on the other hand, I'll just say that sometimes it's just the way life is. It's life has an ebb and flow to it, and maybe it's just the way God's timing works. And what people understood in the 1700s is not what we understand today. And your grandpa, your great grandpa would not have thought that his great grandson would be going to Stanford or whatever, let alone been Asian
American for that matter.
That's right. Well, you know what I'm saying? It's like, right? What the heck, So it's like, it's just, there's just so many things that, sometimes it's just like, I don't want to, beat people up that came from the wherever. That's what they live. That's the world they understood. They didn't. That was their knowledge base, for lack of a better term. So I'm just going to leave it that way. But we're not there anymore, and I think it's just time that we've got. Life needs to be different, and I approach the world not from a political worldview, and I realize some people that's how they see the world. I see it from a biblical worldview, and even if people don't see it from a biblical worldview, I think they'll just.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Unintended cameo from Todd Armour.
That's all right. Even if they don't see it as a biblical worldview, if they just see it as just being good human beings, just treating people right, and recognizing that there's a place and time. And I'm against burning things down. I'm against tearing things up. I'm against all the crazy stuff. I'm against meanness on both sides. Or if there's 18 sides, I'm against meanness on all the sides. Right? I'm against all the stupidity. I'm against all the evil. I'm against all the divisiveness. I'm against all the jerkism. I'm against all the unkindness. I'm against all that. But we're not in a perfect world.
Right.
But I think it's time the church I think it's time the church leads out, and not afraid to speak and stand up for, against oppression in various forms, against injustice, whatever the words are,
Yeah. I really respect that. That's awesome. I'm glad you say so.
I know people use verses in the Bible, and the Bible is like, in the Bible days, there's different words for the word slavery, and in some verses, like in Ephesians, they talk about slave owners and slaves, and in one it's talking about the slave owners, husbands treating their wives a certain way, and I think it's in Ephesians, and the wives treating the husbands a certain way, and the husbands treating their wives a certain way, and the children, the fathers and the mothers, and all that kind of stuff, and slave owners treating the slaves, and slaves treating their owners. But it's really talking about, it's almost like in our culture of employees and employers more than it was a different kind. It's like a bond servant more conversation than it was what we call slavery. Yeah. But then there's other words they use that's translated like, I can't remember what it's called, like a man stealer. I mean, they use the word slave. It's like man. It's a different word. Mm-hmm. And the Bible's strong against that. Now, how they didn't understand that, I don't know. Maybe they didn't understand what the original language said. I don't know. But the Bible is against oppression in all its forms. Mm-hmm. Jesus would not have stood for that at all. And I think it's just time that. Anyway, I'm about to get off topic on you for a second there. One thing I know that you want to talk about a little bit was just the importance of self-reflection and just self-awareness. And you kind of want to challenge us a little bit to a call of action about being kind of self-aware, mm-hmm. and spending some time with that. So just before getting to the call of action side of that, just talk about, how you see the importance of self-reflection and self-awareness.
Yeah. So, just growing up and having people say certain things to me that were clearly off base and racist and really made me feel bad. It oftentimes, like I said, it's not like they were saying like things to make me feel bad, but they more so thought it was like funny, or that it was a joke, and that it was like socially acceptable to say that to me. And like, honestly, it sucked. Like, it wasn't great. And if I spoke up against it, then I would be shot down by everyone just saying I was either overreacting, or like, he was just kidding, or something like that. Or someone would preface it with, I'm not racist, but and say something. And sometimes I wish that people would think about what it was like to be in my shoes, like to have to hear that all the time, because these small little comments, it's like, I mean, I'd guess I averaged maybe once a day average of people saying something to me, like all the way through my childhood growing up. And they were quote unquote harmless, but they really weren't harmless. Like I internalized them, I heard them. Like I really suppressed the Asian side of my heritage for years until I went to Stanford. I didn't really feel connected to my Asian side because I had grown up in an area where people clearly would like trivialize that side of me, that was a joke to them. And I had always wished that these people had known what it was like to be in my shoes, like what it feels like to be centered out like that, and what it feels like to be the only person who looks different in a room, or when I walk into a certain place. This still happens, that people just stare at me and my family, like my siblings, and it happens to all of us, that people just stare at us if we walk into places. And I think the self-reflection.
For those who don't know, let's back up a little bit. So if you don't know, just tell me about your family. Your dad is Caucasian. He's as white as I am.
Yeah.
Mom is Asian.
Mm-hmm.
And you have two sisters?
Two sisters and one brother, all older than.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I'm half Korean. My mom is full Korean. Her parents immigrated from Korea in the 60s. So I'm a second generation American. And the Armour family's been here for like forever, since like the 1600s or something. Yeah, but what I was saying about self-reflection is just it's the duty of all of us to kind of think, what is it like to be the other guy? What is it like to not be in the position that I am? And that, I mean, is like I had been saying about white privilege, is that I've always wondered in my life.
Kind of locked up there.
Are we back? Is it connected again?
Yeah, I hear you now. You're back. Keep talking. I see.
Are you back?
Yep, you're back.
I'm sorry, my internet's pretty bad out here. My farm internet just isn't it.
I understand. Well, hey, but, again, that's a systemic oppression between the big city and being out in the rural County.
I mean, fact of life. Bad internet on the farm. That's just it's being out here. Yeah, what was I saying? I was just saying that yeah, taking a second to think about what it's like to be the other guy, because I had grown up and always wondered what it would be like to be white and not have to hear those things. And I was like, man, I was actually pretty jealous growing up. Like I sometimes wish I wasn't Asian because I wouldn't have to deal with that stuff. And that applies to all of us, is that think about, as a white person living in a rural community with a lot of other white people, what would it be like to be a colored person in a city or here or anything like that? And Black people share their experiences, and it's our responsibility to listen to their voices, because for example, me sharing these perspectives, I'm sure many people here probably wouldn't have known that I felt this way or gone through this growing up here as an Asian American. And that same thing can be applied to being Black in America, in that the way that we need to really listen to their voices. And if people are crying out, as they have been in the protests and such throughout the country, like if millions of people are mobilizing to cry out for justice and saying that things are not fair for them, like what are the chances that all, like however many million of them, are all just wrong? Like I understand what they're feeling to an extent, because I've experienced a bit of it, and I don't get it nearly as bad as Black people in America do. I mean, for example, back at Stanford, something that was very interesting to me was that as I talked to I met a lot more people of color in Stanford, just because it's a very diverse place. And I have two friends who live in Alabama, and they told me something that just really struck me, was that these two are like the nicest guys ever, like super awesome. But they told me they don't go outside at night because police are like actively hunting people down that go outside at night that are Black people. And so they say, like, if you want to get arrested for no reason, or like maybe get beat up or something like that, you go out at night. And so they just said they just don't go outside at night because they're black. And I had never thought about that before. I did not know that that's how they felt. And both of them said that, and they live in different areas of the country. And then I started hearing this from people from all over the country that were black. And I would have never understood that, and I still don't understand it, but I would never have heard that story if I hadn't stopped to listen to their voice. And so that's what I mean by self-reflection, is listen to other people's voices and try to have that empathy and see where they're coming from. Because a lot of, like you're saying, a lot of words that have come out with the, especially Black Lives Matter movement, have been divisive when they really shouldn't be. If you think about what it's like to be another human being's in another human being's shoes and have to experience the things that they have to experience that you may not have to personally experience, it doesn't make their perspective any less valid. And these people in the BLM movement are angry and upset, and they've lived under a system that doesn't treat them fairly for their entire lives, and their families have been like that. And I haven't experienced what they've experienced, and you haven't experienced what they've experienced, but they're crying out, and they have been crying out for decades. You can see the continuity from the 1960s with Martin Luther King Jr. And the Stonewall riots and other things like that. It's always a historical continuity that it's our responsibility to try to understand what it's like to be the other guy.
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody the other day, a similar conversation, and again, I said a while ago, I'm completely against. I don't have a problem with protest. I'm completely against the tearing stuff up, blowing stuff up, burning stuff.
Yeah.
Okay,
Same.
But percentage wise, that's the very small group of people. Mm-hmm. Even the protesters, even 100% of the people protesting is the very small group of people compared to all the people who are in some version of oppression, if that makes any sense. You know what I'm saying? Like, the thing that irritates me, bothers me, whatever, is the thing I struggle with understanding, or that I don't like, or that is my problem, does not override the overwhelming reality of the need, or the reality of the oppression that's built into the system that keeps a certain section of people oppressed. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense, if I didn't say that completely stupidly.
That makes sense.
Okay. And okay, so because there's a bunch of people doing stupid stuff I don't appreciate, fine. But what you said is correct.
Yeah, it's like focusing on the substance of the movement. It's like, there of course are the rioters who are going to break stuff, and that's not
percentage-wise. That's the very small group of people.
Right. There may be thousands of protesters, and there may be 24 people breaking into Target. But
right,
it's very easy to hyper focus on those people and
right,
forget about the thousands of people that were out there protesting peacefully. But the most important thing is to educate yourself about the movement, like why people are out there on the streets in the first place. Like, read their perspectives, read the opinions of people that are out there, why they're out there, and don't let the hooligans that are breaking stuff detract from the substance of the movement, because ultimately the substance of the movement I think is righteous and fair. And breaking private property is not the right way to get people to listen to you, but that's how it is. Well, unfortunately, some people choose to do that.
Well, what I wish they would do, I think the media is a part of the problem. My personal opinion. Mm-hmm. If I was in charge of the news media, what I'd be saying, dude, I'd want to go down to the quiet neighborhood, and I'd want to bring out someone. I want to hear your stories. Let me hear your story of what you're walking through. Tell me your story that illustrates the oppression that's built into the system. Tell me your story of what like my friend says to me a couple of weeks ago, and my friend's as cool as can be. He was a great athlete in high school, all through college, good dude, good looking dude, popular. And he's afraid to go outside with his hat turned around, his baseball cap turned around backwards with a white girl, because he don't know he'll get pulled over. Mm-hmm. Like, what?
Yeah.
What? What are you talking about?
Things that you and I don't have to worry about. Yeah.
Right. I'd rather them to show me those stories and hear a real person tell me a real story than an angry dude, throwing something at somebody.
Yeah.
The real stories, people love to hear stories. I mean, I don't mean because they're fun stories. I mean, just because we connect with stories, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
if somebody hears you tell your story that here you were up for a part and you can't get a lead role because it it's not for an Asian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's kind of sucky.
And I think to piggyback on that idea a little bit is a good thing for us to be doing is to read works by Black authors and Black scholars, because you get that perspective that's not often taught. I mean, like I had told you in an earlier conversation, like Black author, we don't really in school read a lot of material from Black authors, and so obviously you're missing out on some perspective just in that regard. So I'd encourage people to read writings by people like Frederick Douglass, or read some slave narratives, and read works by modern scholars like Angela Davis, and Allison Hobbs, who is a professor at Stanford. She's head of the African American Studies program. She's great. Just reading works by Black scholars and Black voices, and trying to understand where they're coming from. Because like you said, yes, I think stories connect with people way better. And luckily for us, there are stories from Black people that have been written down and are right there for us.
Yeah.
And movies that have been directed by Black people and other things like that tell a different story than if they had been directed or written by a white person, because like we just been talking about, a Black person's experience in America and a white person's experience in America are two very different things. And so, yeah, I'd encourage people to go look out for those resources and to read up and educate themselves, because the resources are right there. And if we want to solve these problems, ultimately we need to work together. And like you've been saying, divisiveness is I think a symptom of misunderstanding, and conflict can be created from nothing if you're so intent on creating conflict. But I think ultimately, like a lot of us are on the same page, wanting to fix these problems, right? And yeah, I think
I'll tell you something you may not know, my wise friend. Did you know that? So I live on East Main Street. Okay, I live on a ranch. My house is a ranch. My neighbor's house, he has a small house next to me. We have the small houses on East Main Street. We're not very big compared to some of those houses. There's some big houses on East Main Street, but our two houses, our two lots used to be the biggest house in Carlinville. Used to be one lot, biggest house in Carlinville. Anyway, and now it's two lots, two houses. But there's several homes right there in that area, 4 or 5, whatever it was, and they were all a part of the Underground Railroad back in the day. And there's tunnels in between them. Back in the day.
Yeah, it's super awesome. I mean, this is so old too. Are the tunnels still like there?
I know at least one of the houses in the basement, you can see where it's walled up at that where there was a tunnel entrance at. I don't know about the others, but but I'm sure you can't. And when we dug out our we put a new garage up, and we dug our garage out, we pulled out big like foundational stone. I mean, monster stones. It's funny when I talk with my hands all the time. You can't see my hands because they're outside the wind. They're outside out here all the time. You can't see them, but they're moving.
It's
anyway, very big rocks.
Yeah,
right? They were really big.
And I mean, just like, I guess that's a good allegory, is that you can still see those physical remnants of a time when slaves were escaping north here, and you can see those same like kind of remnants in the institutions that America's built on that we still use today. It's the same thing. The foundation of your house is built on tunnels for freed slaves or escaping slaves. They weren't freed. And then you can see an American system. Like, you can't expect that it's going to be perfectly not racist when it has been built on the foundation of racism over the last 300, 400 years.
Yeah. Look at you. Look how you turned that, brother. Good for you. Anyway.
Always searching for the opportunity.
Anyway, so hang on there with me for a second. Don't get off line yet. But I want to thank Grayson for being with me tonight. And I hope that's just a good conversation. You guys got the eavesdrop in. Grayson, I wasn't joking earlier when we kind of bragged on you a little bit, what you're doing. We are proud of you, and hope you keep making Carlinville proud. Keep doing great in school, and I know your family's proud of you. And so I hope some people tonight who may not have known you before got to meet you and kind of get to know who you are a little bit in your heart, and maybe we'll watch you from a distance and and maybe one of these days we'll hear about you in the news as you fly into space. So
Well, thank you so
all right,
much
for everybody else, good night, and we'll see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.